I realized that a while ago I promised a video essay on the evolution of Malick's filmography, but these last couple months have been a roller coaster for me personally, and while doing research for the video, I soon came to realize the vast scope of the project I'd set in front of me. It's not that I don't want to do it or haven't started, it's just a lot for me to mentally process right now. So in the spirit of the new year and wanting to actually get stuff done, I wanted to do a film YouTube staple, a best of list, but my twist is putting actual effort into it. As with every year, I'm not able to see everything because there's only so much time and so much interest I can devote, and since ratings or rankings aren't really my thing, this video will serve as an alphabetized collection of all the movies I bothered to give a shit about. These are films I'd highly recommend and wouldn't mind revisiting in the future. If your favorite movie isn't on here, it's more likely that I haven't seen it rather than I didn't like it, so feel free to recommend in the comments below. Otherwise, spoilers ahead for most of these, so feel free to watch them all beforehand if you so desire. Before I begin with the essentials of the year, I wanted to shine a light on quite good films, but ones where my thoughts are too indecisive to comfortably rank them with the others. Films of imperfect merit, if you will. I'll keep this brief so we can get to the meat of the video. The Daniel Craig era of Bond movies is something that has been a fixation of mine for the past couple of years. In a franchise infamous for a lack of continuity, this era was defined by an overarching narrative and an emotionally charged character arc for an otherwise predominantly static one. Most of these movies are pretty good too, Spectre notwithstanding, so I went into this with high hopes. For people investing in James Bond as a character receiving a melodramatic and wildly ambitious closer to this aforementioned arc, you will be sufficiently compensated for your investment. It's meticulously designed and visceral, complemented with handsome photography. It's even blissfully uncluttered from needless fan service and self-conscious homage, and stands on its own. However, it's not a very good traditional Bond movie. So much of it is in service of this arc, which sets out to prove the humanity and worth of Bond, so much so that the villain and master plan feel half-baked. Rami Malek's Safin exists solely as a catalyst for Bond's death, and his evil lair serves as brutalist eye candy as a tomb, but there's little cohesion in it all. Also, a weird criticism I've seen people attempt to make about this film is that in the ending, the movie attempts to prove the facile assertion that Bond and his cultural image are no longer relevant, and that's just ludicrous, because the ending actually answers the question Casino Royale set up, which is, can Bond live in a world where he isn't designed and ordered to kill? No Time to Die tragically answers no, but not without giving Bond a chance to fight for his humanity. It's good blockbuster filmmaking, just underdeveloped plotting. Still worth at least a watch. I realize I placed this movie in the honorable mentions category, but I genuinely thank Campion Guns for some really impressive psychological interplay and some demonstrably impressive classical image construction. The first half, set during the winter, had such an abrupt opening and such a cold, desolate detachment from the characters, I was almost off-put. The interactions with them rarely had any warmth to them, but as the story went on, I started to wonder if perhaps this was intentional by design, because as soon as the snow melted, this blossomed into a very interesting direction, which tackles the concepts of self-destructive passion and jealousy in a distinctly sexual fashion. I don't want to give too much away, but there's a rawness to these performances, Cumberbatch's especially, that suggests an almost unstable quality to their characters, as if the emotions are weapons and their physical presence is their main mode of communication. It's a deceptively tense but gentle uncoiling of a knot of rope, one which recontextualizes the opening in such a profound way that ignoring Campion's intentions would just be silly. I also loved the usage of diegetic music in this. No particular reason, but I found it just as exciting as Wegner's ridiculously wide compositions.
None of this, I'm sure. Imagination's strong, and reason's song is weak and thin. We don't have long.
The latest madcap romantic adventure in Leos Carax's cinematic continuum is preoccupied with two things: the history of sound in films and also about the systemic injustices done towards women reinforced by an industry which subtly cultivates mistrust for the legitimacy of these crimes. Sparks's wry sardonyx and Sarax's self-destructive apathy paired with genuine oddball surrealism marry in pitch-perfect fashion, creating one of the true, pure, sui generis modern musicals. The story is essentially a Universal monster movie or an Edgar Allan Poe poem.
But Edgar Poe gave me the idea of the last sequence. Adventures of Gordon Pym, of Captain Gordon Pym. And there's this amazing description of the character of hanging on a cliff way above the void, and he knows that if he looks down, he's gonna fall. So his whole effort is not to look down, but at the same time, he wants to look down. So I took this, that's what gave me the idea of the last sequence.
About the degradation of a male comic's life as he gives into the abusive impulses and destroys everything he loves in his life. There are several sequences in the first stretch of the film that focus on the way the audience consumes and reacts to his art. It's a complicated relationship, one in which the public gallery acts as almost judge, jury, and executioner, one whose moral compass is fickle, whose delineations between acceptable and or cruel art seem entirely situational. There's a montage of several plays featuring the suffering of female protagonists, and even a throwaway gag about babysitting, which splices in footage of an audience's elated reaction, hinting at the fact that audiences are unable to contend with or discern their favorite art and artists, unintentionally leading to the normalization of abusive actions, as well as an obfuscating media industry and a police force unwilling to do their jobs when it comes to the crimes of the upper class. After all, when it reaches the end, they protest the unprovable murder of Anne, and not the crime he's being jailed for, the conductors, simply because they liked her and don't know the real victim. It's a satire that runs the gambit of accusing all the people it needs to while understanding the instincts behind how they function, all the while succeeding in the specificity of its rage. Despite how patently queasy and uncomfortable the final product is, the presentation of the delectable earworms, in spite of the slightly on-the-nose lyrics, and the genuine dramatic catharsis for the bulk of these crimes, Baby Annette, who's given an unequivocally righteous mouthpiece and one of the best endings of a musical ever, smartly helps this film avoid the pitfalls of cheap nihilism or perhaps even muddled moralizations. It's revelatory and so astonishing to see an auteur who's made a career of looking before he leaps finally be rewarded for his efforts. And as a viewer, I'm glad that dense films are still being made in a way that are theoretically palatable and endlessly watchable. I've been a fan of Eric Andre's offbeat sense of anti-comedy for the past 6 years now, not simply because it's edgy or transgressive, but because of how oddly intimate it is. Andre has a fascination with how his guests or subjects react to the various antics he pulls off, and the joke is usually derived from the disconnect between how his persona behaves and how the viewers authentically react to it. And it's typically not even misanthropic either. There isn't a desire to highlight how stupid or feeble these people are, but usually to capture the essence of how people react naturally to sudden and violent disruptions to their daily cycles. Another filmmaker to try out this experiment in a much less entertaining, but obviously more intellectually fulfilling way was done by William Greaves with his film Symbio-Psycho-Taxiplasm. Bad Trip, in the midst of its set pieces, functions quite similarly. Both films utilize a smokescreen and believable dramatic barrier as the impetus for capturing people's raw emotions, and Bad Trip utilizes these candid reactions to help enhance the core of the narrative. Eric and Harry's characters and their struggles feel real because, at least in an artificial sense, they were to these bystanders in the moment. The elaborate nature of some of these pranks, the car accident and the rooftop hostage situation, for example, are so intense that I can't even believe that they were pulled off so smoothly without anyone getting hurt. Their manufacturing without the context of the invisible cameras provides a sense of meta-realism. It's confounding that a studio comedy like this can pull off some ideas this cogent formally without calling attention to itself, while remaining crass and also silly. An effortless triumph of quirked up boys doing what they do best. Paul Schrader's career-long obsession with Robert Bresson and pushing the boundaries of classical filmmaking through the medium of digital technology has finally led him to culminate his already distinctive style into a new distinguished one for the 21st century, with the release of his films Dog Eat Dog, First Reformed, and now The Card Counter. There's a nihilistic anguish at the neoliberal status quo, in which the bourgeoisie has decimated the earth and its people with sanctioned violence against it, leaving the average person disillusioned to the point where a future doesn't even seem possible. However, I do think his films cleverly avoid an infantile doomerism by fully fleshing out his protagonists, their traumas, their processes, and routines. In every film, Schrader showcases an out, a glimpse at an alternative in which the protagonists can live the lives they subconsciously desire. In this film, the endearing romantic through-line between Tiffany Haddish and Oscar Isaac culminates in a beautifully psychedelic sequence in a park filled with colored lights. Their conversation is tender and indicative of a humanity within them. However, the constant liminal spaces of casino floors and motel exteriors, and even nightmarish military facilities, gives way to a clinical, unseen brutality. William Tell, played by Oscar Isaac, is physically incapable of escaping the specters of violence that haunt him, and in the final moments we return once more to the pickpocket finale, a doomed relationship broken by the senselessness of torture. Also, for a grumpy, Facebook-addicted boomer, Schrader has a real knack for understanding both how intricate the subcultures he examines truly are, and also how the internet functions in a realistic capacity. There's no tenured sequence where the characters utilize some misnomer, and along with other modern anxieties like college debt, feel naturally incorporated into the dialogue. The Card Counter firmly exists in our America, born from our America's sin, the false promise of what democracy offers, but it never feels corny or tasteless. I want to begin this analysis with a foreword, a clarification of a previous statement I made in my hero essay a couple months back. I ended that video with, Yimou might eventually become a figurehead for the Chinese status quo with his nationalistic Olympic ceremonies, but I think his mind and heart are still far from it. I wanted to supplant this with 2 points. A, I was never implying Yimou's artistic merits have declined, or that art with the qualities of propaganda are inherently inferior. It can especially be the opposite in the best hands. And B, countries in the East or outside the jurisdiction of American imperialism are not inherently scary or bad. There's been a lot of discourse circulated by bad faith individuals, labeling movies from China like the Battle of Lake Changjin or this very movie as mere PRC propaganda. If what qualifies art as being lesser or malicious by design is simply to show pride for one's nation, then America pumps out even more propaganda, from war movies to the MCU to a countless amount of FBI propaganda shows on daytime television. Relax and hold art to more consistent standards if you're going to be performatively picky. Nationalism does exist, and if nationalism is used as a tool to counter the influence of imperialism, then maybe we should consider the material conditions of why it exists rather than condemning it forthrightly. You can simultaneously be critical of the actions of a nation while understanding how their society functions differently to your own. Cliff Walker's plays perfectly in tandem with Yimou's previous film Shadow in a slickly sublime fashion. Both films are about deconstructing the notion of valorant heroism by showing the physical cost of what ideology does to your mind and body. There's a grim perversity with the way that the gore is shot that's truly unsettling and conveys just how high the stakes are for these characters. Yimou's narratives, especially for his action movies, have this heightened dramatic state where the characters are always shifting allegiances to provide new contextual information, and Cliff Walker's takes this to labyrinthian lengths by starting us off in medias res with the spies mid-operation. We learn about their desires and motivations in the thick of it, and the dangers they immediately face. However, Cliff Walker's is also a new kind of film for Yimou. A new time period, setting, and a way to shoot all this. Xiao Ding's camera work has never felt this effortlessly elegant before. The action is shot for gorgeous clarity, with ruthlessly efficient editing and widescreen cinematography that allows us to soak in the geography of Harbin and accentuates the brutality of the violence, delivering more effective thrills than pretty much any American equivalent to come out last year. The ending, ironically enough, is one of Yimou's more hopeful ones, which promises a future in which the actions of our endearing heroes mattered supremely in combating injustices caused by the Japanese in Manchukuo. There's nothing quite like Yimou's blend of uproarious populism and emotionally mature storytelling. It's exciting that a filmmaker as old and prolific as him is still going strong. 4 films in the past 3 years, plus another foray into the Olympic ceremony. The transitions between the celluloid and digital ages of filmmaking caused many directors to make many fascinating and experimental changes to not only their individual styles, but sometimes even entire cinematic movements. Many academics who are more knowledgeable than myself have wrote essays on the formal evolutions this new type of cinema has offered to directors looking to experiment, but what I want to talk about right now is the pragmatic side of this discussion, how digitality has made cinema more accessible and more elastic on the technical side. The convenience of technology that comes with cheaper and smaller cameras allows for independent artists to utilize new avenues of form that were once barred from them. Take, for example, the difference between the duration of Ming Liang's very own Goodbye Dragon Inn and Stray Dogs. With his 2013 film Stray Dogs, Tsai was able to play around with the length of his takes reels of film once barred him from. The final sequence of that film takes up nearly a fourth of Goodbye Dragon Inn's runtime, allowing him to allow audiences to experience his films and sequences with more senses than just their eyes. It lies somewhere between the realm of dreams and the next stage of silent cinema, more fugue state than movie. And Days takes this to the extreme, absconding dialogue almost in its entirety, and the one or two sequences it does show up in, it remains muffled and untranslated, in favor of pure immersion. What little narrative exists focuses on the mundane minutiae, picking out the small moments of beauty in a doctor's appointment, or making a dinner, or crossing the street, playing with the audience's anticipation of narrative incident, until finally, the movie erupts into an unbroken moment of pure erotic intimacy, two men making love without any hesitation or pretenses, and afterwards, a shared shower and a dinner, and also a music box playing an innocent tune. Their gazes imply a level of immense interiority, and just like that, the moment dissipates. Their lives return to their boring normality, but the memory of their encounter remains burned in theirs and our memory. Stirring major work from a man who loves to push the boundaries of his own craft forward and forward. I think it would be fair to label such a sweeping, complete, immense text like this as Hamaguchi's Solaris. Not literally, because of course in college he actually remade that as a student project, but because of what the film thematically presents. Both films are preoccupied with the unknowable aspects of a being's personality and the ways that mystery can affect relationships. Drive My Car, based on my assertion, feels less like a straightforward Murakami adaptation and more like a mix of several literary and filmic works interpolated to make something entirely new and entirely introspective, often commenting on itself metatextually. The text of Uncle Vanya, for example, is utilized like some directors would use a diegetic song. It's divine coincidence that the doubly fictional character's anguish in the play mirrors the protagonist, specifically the director Kafuku's, inner turmoils as they search for peace and happiness in the face of immense loss. This journey traipses along tranquilly, the leisurely pacing capturing these characters in verite as the interior of the eponymous Red Sob is utilized like a confessional. When the camera doesn't capture it slithering through the streets of Hiroshima in immensely wide shots, the characters bare their hearts staring directly into the lens, startling intimacy to match the starkness of tonal control. The thoughtfulness with which Hamaguchi comprises his thesis from these moments is astounding. One character in the film jests that finding communication in spite of language barriers is beautiful, but it honestly is. There are, if I counted correctly, 7 languages in the film: Japanese, Mandarin, Indonesian, Tagalog, Korean, KSL, and briefly English, but what's being said literally is typically less important than the implication of what's being said. The language of cinema and how these sequences are edited rewires our brain as an audience to pick up on these subtle, otherwise imperceptible gestures. Sometimes a cigarette is more than just a cigarette. As the story introduces us to new, sometimes contradictory information, the in-universe play and individual narrative details become small pieces of the larger emotional tapestry. As Watari takes Kafuku to her destroyed childhood home, these pieces all fall into place, becoming sewn together as we reach a catharsis, one in which Watari comments on how people's intentions and identity are often less complex and mysterious than we think, and that perhaps our feelings for each other are genuine, whether in life or in posthumous memory. And as Kafuku pleads to a higher power for one more chance to apologize, to get angry at, to kiss his wife once more, I see myself in him. It's a brutal desperation we will all feel, in one way or another. The feeling of loss is a universal experience, and yet the ways in which we individually process loss are contained in a universe of our own. How we hurt is how we know we're us, and yet the movie ends on an optimistic note. A continuation, a chance for something after desolation. Hamaguchi understands humanity so startlingly well, and with this he's crafted the film of a generation. relationship with Evangelion is unique compared to a lot of other people. I watched it long after my formative years and long after my teenage anime craze, and long after the internet's fixation and discovery of it a few years ago. My outlook on the original run of the 26 episodes is one of confliction. I understand and recognize how subversive it was to the cultural landscape of the time, how it reinvented the mecha genre and opened up avenues to talk about otherwise clandestine topics like mental health and environmental anxiety. The opening 7 episodes and most of the final 10 are incredible and depressing and visually inventive and gargantuan in scale. However, there are a few caveats to me calling this show an unequivocal masterpiece. The constant sexualization of minors, the inconsistent structure, pivoting between these weird and aimless episodic stories focusing on middle school drama, and the mainline episodes which conduct the prototypical tones and thematic fetishes of what I perceive to be Evangelion. This is not to say I dislike the Brockagian breakdown of the last 2 episodes. I do, it's cathartic and formally unlike any anime I've ever seen before. But I wish the somber tone came with a more mature cross-examination of these characters' psyches. I'm at a period of my life where film, to me, is an image-based medium which can be primarily used to examine and reflect either ideology, culture, or emotional truths. I think there is a clear distinction in examining film as an image-based medium, as opposed to a narrative one, because the former assumption is a much more liberating one than the latter, and no better place to evolve and experiment with the filmic medium than through animation. Budget and physics are able to constrain the visual ideas of even the most avant-garde to a series of invisible rules of conduct, but animation can house literally any possible idea the human mind can conjure, and that's incredible. And that's kind of why I'm so angry and hard at the current affairs of animation, especially in the West. Animation in the West is typically not a vehicle for altruistic thought, generally a plastic, textureless wasteland of pseudo-musicals and infantilizing narratives that is nearly stylistically identical to every other director and team in the entire industry. I mean, I suppose once in a blue moon you'll get a really nice cartoon saloon production, or maybe once a decade a Henry Selick stop-motion flick, but the majority of animation right now is just bad. Even anime is in a rough place right now when it comes to the diversity of ideas in the industry. Many creators like Mamoru Oshii and Hayao Miyazaki were worried about the future of a medium in the face of an industry fixated on creating derivative work filled with the same tropes and characters and style for a primarily complacent otaku audience. This is not to say everything's hopeless, but it seems, for whatever reason, unilaterally, animation's not taken as seriously as live-action cinema, despite the fact that the potential for originality and imagination is much, much greater. I preface my analysis with these 2 points because, to me at least, the rebirth of Evangelion exhibits both the growth of Anno as a human being and such a radical evolution to animation as a medium, I can't really help but be in awe of its splendor. The rebirth, on the surface, and especially in the first 2 entries, feels simply like a tech upgrade, a way to imbue these recognizable images with the pop art flair of a ridiculous amount of money, and the true gravitas this apocalyptically beautiful spectacle always deserved. But as 3.0 and now 3.0 plus 1.0 have released, the existence of the saga has become much more clear, at least in my eyes. This is Anno, a much older person, a person with more experience, a more optimistic person, imbuing these characters and this world with an ulterior sense of purpose and feelings of universal love. This schism provided an interesting contrast between each vision, one where both are needed for full contextualization. Anno had a hard time writing 3.0 plus 1.0, as he himself admitted that he could no longer understand Shinji, and by now his current self was closer to Gendo than Shinji, a quandary that would birth the main thematic conflict of the film, a creator reckoning with no longer associating with a project so birthed from himself, a project so influential and seminal to the entire medium. How would anybody say goodbye to something as monumental as that? Well, by turning the film into another autobiography, of course. The first half of the film concludes the character arcs for all 3 Eva protagonists, Rei, Asuka, and Shinji, by allowing themselves to self-actualize and understand their purpose completely outside the context of Eva piloting. The second half justifies the 4th protagonist, Mari's existence, and allows all of the protagonists and the audience a much-deserved closure and a chance to finally move on. The film interpolates a lot of images from the end of Evangelion, recontextualizing these moments almost entirely without the inhumane brutality of that film, allowing our characters to bask in the love that they have for each other. It allows them to finally grow up like Anno has, but not without providing some of the best spectacle probably any movie ever has displayed. The opening scene has Mari fighting off hundreds of nerve robots with the Eiffel Tower, and the movie ends with, a lot going on, but more importantly, Gendo and Yui sacrifice and a definitive goodbye to all the Evas. There's a sequence after the fight between father and son where Shinji and Rei are talking in an abandoned film studio as images from the anime are projected on a screen behind them in reverse, suggesting that the moments they are witnessing are not an erasure of the franchise's legacy, but rewinding their lives to a simpler time, an experience without trauma. The curse of Eva has been lifted, and with that the characters age into adults and exit stage left into the real world. While imperfect in structure, if you care about narrative, you'll be displeased to learn it degradates into complete obfuscation, a series of undefined MacGuffins and sci-fi word salad in true and honest Eva fashion, also containing brief moments of the aforementioned lechery, albeit far less explicit. I feel as though Eva 3.0 plus 1.0 is a film which ushers in a new saga for both the artists to creatively explore an infinite possible amount of avenues, and for the audience to gain value in watching what they love come to a meaningful conclusion. Watching this movie really is like completing a life once you've toiled through the anime and all the movies. I find the lyrics of the song What If from the soundtrack poignant in a way that the film fills my heart. They go as follows. This is a short film, so I'll be brief with my summary, but Jan Gonzalez as a director is someone who means a lot to me on a personal level. His first two features, You and the Night and Knife Plus Heart's specific kind of sincere camp and hypersexuality spoke to me as a burgeoning and confused trans girl several years ago. I often revisit these films in my mind as incredibly affirming in an increasingly alienating existence. If any films were to be called Evelyn Core, these would be the ones. I recently discovered that Jan actually has a profile on Letterboxd, and due to his status as a curator for the recent adult film section, and we now follow each other. The moment this dropped, I eagerly watched it. Not much can really be said. It's an aesthetic experiment in 5 minutes of pure vibes. If I was to use descriptors, I would say it's a gender-bent version of Corel, a music video showcasing an ethereal alternate dimension of urban landscapes and the beautiful lesbians which inhabit it, spending a lifetime of nocturnal pleasure. There's so much texture in the glitter and fabrics, the images become intoxicating. I've watched it so many times it's almost concerning. Back in 2018, when Isle of Dogs released, I realized that Wes Anderson had hit a funk, a creative impasse in which his works were no longer fresh or evolutionary. His quirks were predictable, the tonal balancing acts he had mastered so well in films like The Life Aquatic and Fantastic Mr. Fox had all but evaporated. I was ready to savor the films of his I enjoyed and call it quits. But after over a year of waiting, The French Dispatch not only matched, but surpassed my expectations. It has cemented that Wes is not a one-trick pony, not an empty stylist, and certainly not a director incapable of exiting his comfort zone. The French Dispatch is legitimately hard to talk about because of how much it accomplishes and how little it truly signifies. But I'll try my best. It's an anthology where each short is overtly referencing all of the directors that Anderson is truly inspired by: Rivette, Godard, Ashby, Tati, etc., where the emotional breadth of his typically longer narratives is successfully and effectively condensed in half the runtime, where the acidic irony of his work is meaningfully commented upon in the text by its own characters. And formally, this thing pushes the absolute limits of his already fussy pastel aesthetic. The dilated structure and diegesis-smashing formal tics often make this feel more like an exhibition with the way it presents its images, rather than a narrative film. Anderson uses black and white, handheld, axial cuts and movements, animation, aspect ratios, cross-sections, longer takes, and more to establish an internal logic that proves this obviously artificial world is in fact a real place, at least to its fictional inhabitants. There's an intimacy in the prose and the opening section that endears us to this otherworldly city which couldn't possibly be real, which contradicts everything I said about the style. This dichotomy only makes the endings hit that much harder. This movie made me think a lot about my mortality and my impermanence, but surprisingly it didn't make me feel insignificant. The discourse around this film is mostly pedantic and underselling just exactly what this achieves, but one common complaint I've seen even among reasonable analyses is, what is the through line of The French Dispatch? It's obvious to understand what Wes does formally with this, but this question is much harder to answer because I'm convinced there is no overarching theme you can glean from this. If this film is supposed to replicate the experience of reading a fine magazine, which it is, then it's shining a light on somebody's story. Finding the bizarre and wonder from the mundane, it exposes us to something sensational, even for a brief moment. These moments are what defines the value of a life, and what we choose to love and taste and feel every single day before we die.
With your feet in the air and your head on the ground.
I always knew James Wan had these kind of devilishly carefree formal chops in him. It's genuinely really exciting to see a creator who's established his brand of creating 3 of the most popular horror franchises of the past 2 decades finally dip his toes into a more anarchically sadistic form of throwback horror. This isn't the lo-fi grunge of Saw, nor the overproduced anachronisms of The Conjuring. This is the mind-alteringly expensive digital playgrounds of Fury 7 and Aquaman repurposed to make a Frank Lennon-Hodder-esque giallo mixed with pulpy, gory grindhouse elements. Sometimes a film doesn't need to be super dense or emotionally fulfilling. Sometimes all you need are spliced together one takes where the camera does acrobatics around its subject, following them through an entire house spanning 2 floors, which ironically enough is one of the first set pieces of the film. When James Wan said that Aquaman 2 was going to be visually inspired by Bava, it instantly became my most anticipated blockbuster of this year. I've already talked about at length why I think this is the best movie of the year on my friend Cecil's channel, which will be linked in the description, so I'll keep my summary brief. The Matrix Resurrections feels like an antidote to the recent trend of impersonal blockbusters which reject maturity and resonance for a disingenuous, irreverent postmodernism. I like movies that look amazing, make you feel with your heart and mind, try to accomplish ideas that no one has ever attempted before. The Matrix Quadrilogy, as one singular entity, is perhaps the most fully realized idea of a revolution on film that creates a true post-identity utopia in which people can exist free from the shackles of capitalism and conservatism. Resurrections specifically is an autobiography about a woman losing faith in herself as a trans person, and as a leading creative force for the property she and her sister poured years of their life into. It's a testament to the unflinching power of love, of how the things that we recognize evolve and change, as we do, and how we wish sometimes things would just stay the same. I haven't seen a film this year that rewards me as much as this. Obviously, Guillermo's version isn't as good as the seedy, sardonic, and forward-thinking masterpiece from Edmund Golding all those years ago, but to end the conversation at that comparison would feel, to me at least, quite disingenuous and antithetical to good faith criticism. While it follows the plot points near exactly, Del Toro injects a prologue and a tonally different, more bleak ending, painting Stanton Carlyle as a man not only capable of conning everyone around him, but himself. Sure, Cooper is different from Power, but what remains in both is Stan's poisonous pride. In the remake, it's best demonstrated by his refusal to imbibe. The glass calls to him with a seductive ring every time he picks it up, and in his most desperate hour drinks as though he had a lifetime of experience. And while in the original it's made relatively obvious that Carlyle killed Pete with wood alcohol instead of moonshine, here the implication is that, in spite of his pretty southern boy routine, he's capable of murder. And while I prefer the ending of the original, mirroring the broken relationship of Xena and Pete with Stan and Molly, there's something entrancing about the grimy desperation of Guillermo's ending, painted with gory and visceral carnage to match the destruction of ego entirely. The shot of Stan in the hanged man pose on the train just drives home the cosmic inevitability of his downfall even more. I also really like how Nightmare Alley is shot. The colorized version, while definitely a compromise, still has all the moist texture and contrasting lighting of monochrome, and its floaty, voyeuristic direction makes the lens akin to something of an eavesdropper, casually peering into something that we should never have seen. Paired with the most grotesquely decadent scenery and the vignette transitions continued from Crimson Peak, 2021's Nightmare Alley contrasts itself from the original by being wholly fixated in the past and its inescapable tie to our present. I understand that Guillermo may have lost some favor with people since the days of Pan's Labyrinth and Hellboy 2, but for me, a decently loyal fangirl of his material, this is such a recovery from the dismal Shape of Water. M. Night Shyamalan, for the most part, is a really good director. I could end it here and send my comment section spiraling into fevered rage, but I also want to do his work a service by explaining why it's unreasonably maligned and defending this film in the process. M. Night's films may initially be perceived as abnormally awkward or indulgent or this and that, but his films are that way simply because their blunt emotional honesty comes from a place of the working class, and divorced from the typical dramatics of Hollywood stories and Hollywood types. Movies like Unbreakable and Lady in the Water about how the ordinary internalize the extraordinary, and how in these moments the best of their collective strength is displayed in the face of shared trauma or opposition to a systemic force. This conflict is probably most obviously examined in Glass, but I have certain personal hurdles that keep me from labeling that as a late masterpiece. While I delight in Unbreakable's personal origin of a superhero and respect the occasional bad optics of Split's Hitchcockian thrills, there's a third act fouling up the impressive filmmaking of Glass's first stretch. The apathetic fetishization of the cruel deaths of these protagonists I'd grow genuine connection to doesn't really offset the supposed catharsis, making the victory feel incredibly hollow. It felt borderline exploitative to the legacy of those characters in a way I rarely saw in Shyamalan's work. However, I think that Old is a magnificent remedy for that. Old plays out visually and structurally like a chamber drama, except it takes place outdoors. Zhoulakis, probably the only modern DP akin to a rock star, uses his lens to dance around his subjects, constantly shifting perspective and recontextualizing narrative information with a keen eye for blocking. And the colors shine. Every surface feels worn and sun-soaked, despite the ostensible digital technology. Shyamalan and co. utilized this simplistic approach to disseminate his ideas about exploitation and class divide amongst these characters with clearly defined ideological arguments amidst the group. And despite this, nearly every character is given deserved respect, especially past their death. I still have some reservations about making the Doctor's racism rooted in his supposed schizophrenia when his symptoms are much more akin to dementia. The horror from the conceit ingratiates the struggle into our minds as we watch. It's understandable how anyone would react after witnessing the inevitable deterioration of our bodies happen in such a short span of time. And yet, in spite of this overwhelming tragedy, individual moments of beauty shine through. A couple's marital spats are inadvertently solved by both parties forgetting why they were even mad in the first place, and two children willingly spend a year of their lives simply to enjoy building a sandcastle for the last time. The twist here is probably one of the smartest of Shyamalan's entire career here too. After witnessing this completely unknown force rip through the entire cast of characters, we see a character played by the man himself perversely filming and recording the suffering of the main cast. It's a shot ripped straight from Rear Window, used to highlight the queasy voyeuristic qualities of the act, to purvey the information to a team of scientists who use this data to create better medicine. It's as if he's acknowledging the hypothetical lack of empathy and treating these characters like narrative pawns. So in a breathtakingly kind coda, we see the two remaining survivors, well into their middle age, righteously receive justice for the pain wrought on not only them, but every victim of the cruelty. It's mind-blowingly beautiful, and it makes me so happy to see Shyamalan this self-aware and cogent. So of course this movie got turned into a meme. In early 2019, at the age of 58, Sean Sono nearly died of a heart attack. He described the experience in a film stage interview as, "I was literally dead for 60 seconds. I went to outer space, if you could believe. So I experienced this totally unrealistic world, and all these experiences gave me totally new inspirations and now influence my filmmaking style." Sono accredits this experience to an immediate shift in his filmmaking process, one which seems to have morphed his typically anarchic and nihilistic sentiments to something more categorically optimistic. Red Post on Escher Street is surprisingly not a transgressive film. Its biggest subversion is the lack of any. This mainly plays out as Sono's riff on one of his favorite films, Edward Yang's Terrorizers, with the way it documents the interplay between filmic reality and filmic fiction. It's also an autobiography on its own creation, a film directly inspired by the same punkish spirit that drove the earlier non-narrative works of Sono, but with the added clarity of nearly 30 years of filmmaking. Its glossy digital sheen acts as an invitation for the audience to submit to its breezy repetitive structure and well-defined characterization. And then Sono rewards us with perhaps his formal apex. Prisoners of the Ghostland may have offered his most expensive and elaborate production design at the cost of any real mental staying power, but Red Post on Escher Street's collective joy for the process of creating art sees the climax as a massively scaled balancing act where the lens flits between so many perspectives that the figures lose their individual complexities and become part of the chaotic canvas which derails the in-universe production. The blocking and length of takes allows the geography of the film's set to exist as more than a workman-like schedule of moving parts and explodes outwards into a collage of conflicting, passionate ideals. It's a movie so in love with movies and the people who make them, it transcends the limits of the frame. If this is the kind of formal chops Sono received from dying for 60 seconds, maybe there is a universal force uniting us all in our quest for understanding. Well, let me tell you about the way she looked. Titane is a rough movie. It's a realm built almost entirely on constructed identities and tough love, one where its images are both illusory and untrustworthy, one in which the signifiers of overwhelming dysphoria are made metaphorical through the various degradations of bodies, acts of pain and rot which serve to render flesh as a prison, snagged nipple piercings, bruised and mangled flesh from overdose, bound breasts contorted from pregnancy, and even neurological damage affects even our cis protagonists. Alexia Adrian only finds escape from their alienating world through paranoid bouts of retributive violence and the act of transitioning in order to become someone different from the person whose flesh they despise. In spite of this world poisoned by misogyny, the interiority between Lyndon and Roussel provides a warmth that shows that the world is worth it. It's ironic that a firefighter's heart burns as passionately as it does. The tenets of New French Extremity, a typically crass and infantile genre, are used to create an empathetic experience where the audience can vicariously experience the maddening discomfort that comes with the inconceivable depths of dysphoria. There's recursive and elliptical editing in actions, one that blurs the performance of masculinity and femininity into a new type of existence, one in which the flesh or the gender binary doesn't influence identity, but where self-expression does. In one of the last sequences, a party in the fire station leads to Adrian dancing in the way Alexia used to in the strip club, which provides disgust and confusion amongst the hyper-masculine firefighters, but one which inspires awe in their surrogate father. The images here are rendered with a starkness to them, a brutal clinicity which allows us to witness these events bathed in surreal and sickly industrial lighting. The forest fire sequence might be one of my favorites this year from a cinematography standpoint. All of this leading the movie's journey to an inexorable conclusion, one where the flesh is discarded in favor of a new form, a being of beauty synthesized from human and machine, a symbol of perfection in attaining the impossible, a form of tentative self-love. Anything is possible through love. 2021 was an interesting year for cinema. I feel as though the lineup here is atypically more full and varied due to the various delays from last year related to COVID-19. There were plenty of good movies with either refreshing or reassuring ideas in the face of a dangerously uncertain future. It's nice to move forward with a form of optimism, as long as it remains realistic to our personal situation. We're more divided than ever, but we can use art as the great instigator for connection and opening up different types of dialogue with new types of people. I riffed on film discourse plenty of times in this video, but through my passion for these various films, I've met new people who have introduced and informed me on so many important topics. And that's the beauty of subjectivity in film. Reciprocal education and empathy. Something we should all keep in mind going forward, not only for this year, but continuously. Thanks so much for watching. This was absolutely exhausting to make. I hope you learned something new about either me or yourselves. Bye.